You see them everywhere now, right? On houses, outside businesses, um, even those smart doorbells,
Yeah.
security cameras.
Yeah, they're ubiquitous.
And they're supposed to give us that peace of mind,
Hmm.
you know, protect our stuff, our spaces.
That's the idea, certainly.
But what if the very thing we're relying on, the thing meant to keep us safe, could actually, um, open the door for people who want to do harm? Kind of a strange thought, isn't it?
It really is a paradox. We install these devices thinking, okay, defense layer one, but their connectivity, the fact they're online, that inherently brings risks we might not even fully grasp initially.
Exactly. And that's really what we want to dig into today. We're doing a deep dive into these, often overlooked security risks that are hiding inside a lot of these internet-connected cameras.
Right.
We're going to explore how they could be exploited, the potential impacts, and they're really wide-ranging from, personal privacy stuff right up to potentially hitting national critical infrastructure.
Yeah, the stakes can get incredibly high.
And maybe most importantly, what we can actually do about it.
We've been looking through quite a bit of really eye-opening material for this, trying to understand the scope of the potential threats these devices pose, in different contexts.
Right.
And also identifying, okay, what are the concrete things people and organizations can do to mitigate those risks?
So our mission today is pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Let's unpack what we found. Understand the vulnerabilities baked into these things, figure out the methods attackers might actually use, grasp the consequences, good and bad, or mostly bad, I guess, and really give you some actionable knowledge.
Yeah, arm you with information.
It's about understanding the landscape, this whole connected camera world, so you can be better informed and hopefully better protected, because there are just so many devices out there now.
And that understanding, that's the absolute foundation. You can't secure what you don't understand.
Totally agree. Now, before we jump into the fascinating and sometimes, frankly, a bit unsettling details of these vulnerabilities, we do want to take a moment to acknowledge our sponsor, Stonefly.
Absolutely. Because in today's world, data security is just paramount, isn't it? Especially when you see threats like ransomware just continuing to climb.
Yeah, the numbers are stark. We've seen figures suggesting ransomware attacks are up, around 25%, and data breaches even higher, maybe 43%. It's significant.
It really highlights the urgency. In that kind of environment, secure storage isn't just like a nice to have. It's really essential. It's foundational.
And that's exactly where Stonefly comes in. Yeah. They're really recognized as a leader in enterprise storage, backup and disaster recovery, AI storage, cloud solutions,
Right.
the whole spectrum.
Right.
So if you're looking for secure storage that's genuinely designed to be ransomware-proof, Stonefly actually sells air-gapped and immutable storage solutions.
Which are critical defenses against ransomware. Air gapping keeps backups physically disconnected, and immutability means the data can't be altered or deleted, even by attackers who gain access.
Exactly. This is the kind of bedrock security you need when you're thinking about protecting sensitive data, like, potentially vulnerable video feeds or critical operational logs, or really any vital business information. It all needs secure storage.
So for anyone needing that kind of robust, resilient storage, reaching out to Stonefly is a really good step. You can contact them at sales@stonefly.com to schedule a demo.
Yeah, check them out. They provide the kind of solutions that really bolster your overall security posture, which, as we're seeing, is just increasingly vital against these sophisticated threats.
Okay, so where do we start with the cameras themselves, the foundational threat?
Right. Let's get into it. How do these cameras even become targets? What makes them, inherently vulnerable in the first place?
Well, at the core, a lot of the material describes what they call inherent security weaknesses. And when you break that down, it often comes down to some surprisingly basic things.
Like what?
Well, a big one is just a lack of fundamental data encryption. The video feed itself or the control signals, sometimes they're just sent across the network in the clear, unscrambled.
So it's like sending a postcard through the mail instead of a sealed letter. Anyone along the way could potentially take a peek.
That's a great analogy. Exactly. And that lack of encryption, it's often paired with other issues, like just poor default security settings straight out of the box.
Meaning how they're set up at the factory?
Yeah. Manufacturers often prioritize ease of setup, plug-and-play convenience, over locking things down tightly. So you might get wide-open network ports, unnecessary services running in the background, and crucially, really easily guessable or widely known default usernames and passwords.
Ah, the default password problem. We'll definitely come back to that.
Oh, absolutely. And another point that's quite concerning is that some devices are configured, again, by default, to communicate directly back to the manufacturer's servers, phoning home, essentially.
Sending what, telemetry, status.
It could be various things, sometimes telemetry, sometimes checking for updates, sometimes providing remote access capabilities facilitated by the manufacturer. But depending on where that manufacturer is based or, their relationship with government entities.
That could be a significant concern,
Mhm.
especially if that data includes things like the camera's location or what network it's on.
Precisely. That outbound communication channel can be a vulnerability in itself, or at least a privacy concern. And the potential impact of all these weaknesses gets amplified massively because these cameras aren't just sitting in people's living rooms.
Right. You mentioned critical infrastructure.
Yeah. The scale is pretty staggering. The information we've looked at points to potentially tens of thousands of these kinds of internet-connected cameras being present on the networks of U.S. critical infrastructure entities.
Tens of thousands. Wow. That's
Yeah.
that's a huge potential attack surface spread across really vital parts of the country.
It is. Think about sectors like, chemical plants, the energy grid, water treatment facilities, places where any disruption could have really widespread and severe consequences.
Absolutely.
And it's not just the sheer number, it's where they're connected within those facilities. Some of these cameras aren't just on the general office IP network. They're directly connected to operational technology OT networks.
OT. Those are the systems that actually control the physical processes, right?
Right.
Like valves, pumps, machinery.
Exactly. The industrial control systems, the SCADA systems, these are the networks that manage the physical operations. Having potentially vulnerable cameras sitting on those same networks makes them incredibly attractive targets for sophisticated attackers, high-value targets.
And this isn't just theoretical worry, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned there's a history here. These things have been exploited.
Oh, definitely. The materials highlight several past incidents that really underscore the danger. For instance, there are reports indicating that certain state-sponsored cyber actors, specifically from the PRC, have targeted and exploited internet-facing cameras.
How recently?
Well, as recently as September 2024, reports suggested these actors were using networks of compromised internet-connected cameras as part of a botnet.
A botnet. So they're not just watching the feed, they're hijacking the camera itself, turning it into a zombie.
That's exactly it. They commandeer the camera's processing power and its internet connection. Then they link thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of these compromised devices together into a network, a botnet that they control.
And use it for what?
Most commonly for launching distributed denial of service or DDoS attacks. They direct all that combined traffic from the botnet, all those cameras sending junk data at a specific target, like a website or a company's network, and just overwhelm it, knocking it offline.
Like the Mirai botnet did a few years back. They used a lot of cameras, didn't it?
Precisely. Mirai was a wake-up call. It showed how easily vast numbers of vulnerable Internet of Things devices, including cameras, could be weaponized, often just by scanning for and exploiting those weak or default passwords we mentioned.
And there was a more maybe targeted example earlier this year involving infrastructure.
Yes. In March 2024, there was a report concerning cameras made in the PRC that were installed at a U.S. oil and natural gas firm. These cameras were found to be communicating back to servers located in China.
Right.
And one of those servers apparently had potential links to a known state-sponsored cyber actor.
So that sounds less like a disruptive botnet, more like potential espionage or setting up shop inside the network.
That's the immediate concern, yeah. It raises red flags about surveillance, maybe exfiltrating sensitive data or establishing some kind of covert foothold within a critical network. And this isn't a new tactic either. The reports indicate that state-sponsored actors, again, particularly linked to the PRC, have been actively targeting vulnerabilities in PRC-made cameras since at least 2020.
So it's sustained effort over several years.
It suggests a deliberate strategic focus on compromising these specific types of devices.
Which implies they see these cameras as valuable entry points.
Absolutely. And as we touched on, when these cameras are connected to sensitive systems like the OT networks or safety instrumented systems.
Safety systems, like emergency shutdown controls.
Potentially, yes. Systems designed to prevent accidents. If cameras are linked into those networks, their potential misuse goes way beyond just spying. Analysis suggests they could be leveraged not just to observe, but to actually gain unauthorized access into those critical systems and potentially manipulate them.
So the camera could literally be the jumping off point to mess with the industrial controls.
That's the pathway cyber actors could try to exploit. A vulnerability in the camera, or maybe a stolen password for its management interface, could be that initial entry point into the network segment where the OT or safety systems live. From there, an attacker would try to move laterally, explore, and eventually interact directly with the operational technology.
Okay, that brings us to this idea of persistent access and uh, pre-positioning. That sounds particularly ominous, especially for critical infrastructure.
It's definitely one of the most serious potential threats. If these devices are compromised, they can act as really stealthy, long-term entry points. They might sit there, compromised but undetected, for months or even years, giving attackers ongoing access.
Like a hidden backdoor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the information suggests that state-sponsored cyber actors have actively compromised critical infrastructure IT networks with the potential goal of pre-positioning themselves.
Pre-positioning. You mean getting in, mapping things out, understanding the systems,
Mm.
maybe planting malicious tools or backdoors,
Yes.
and just leaving them there, dormant, ready to be activated later.
That's the concept. Establishing a deep, resilient presence inside the target network, building capabilities that can be triggered later, perhaps during a major geopolitical crisis, a conflict, or some other contingency. The camera, that seemingly simple device on the wall, could be the initial toehold that allows them to do all that preparation for a future disruptive or destructive attack.
Wow. And what makes defending against this even harder is you mentioned how these cameras actually get onto the network in the first place, the supply chain issues.
Right. That's a huge complicating factor for everyone. The organizations trying to secure their networks, the regulators trying to set standards. Practices like white labeling are really common.
White labeling.
Yeah.
So one company makes the camera maybe somewhere overseas.
Exactly. But then it's sold under a completely different brand name, maybe a well-known Western brand. Or sometimes they're integrated into larger security packages bundled with a DVR, or specific software making their actual origin even harder to trace.
So if regulators, like say the FCC with their 2022 ban on importing certain cameras flagged as high risk from specific manufacturers,
Right.
these white labeled or integrated devices could potentially slip through because the final product doesn't clearly state the original manufacturer.
Precisely. It makes enforcing things like import bans or identifying potentially vulnerable equipment already installed incredibly difficult. The material we reviewed really emphasizes the need for better tools and methods to identify these rebranded or integrated cameras. Without more transparency in the supply chain, knowing what components are actually inside these devices, it's very hard to manage the risk effectively.
It's a major blind spot.
It really is.
Okay, so we've established the baseline.
Uh-huh.
Potentially vulnerable cameras, maybe from complex or risky supply chains, are out there, sometimes in critical places. They have a history of being exploited, sometimes by sophisticated actors looking to gain persistent access or pre-position. Now, let's really zero in on the how. What are the most common technical weak spots and attack methods used?
Well, probably the most common, and honestly one of the most frustrating because it should be avoidable, is just weak or default passwords.
Still, in this day and age, you'd think we'd have learned.
You'd think so, but the data consistently shows it's a massive problem. Some estimates suggest something like, 1 in 5 web users still uses incredibly easy to hack passwords. The same old stuff, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, password, QWERTY, basic dictionary words.
The stuff that's on every hacker's basic list.
Exactly. It's the lowest hanging fruit, and attackers always go for it first.
And connected cameras often make it easy to try these.
They really do. Almost every network camera has some kind of web interface or a specific port you connect to for setup, configuration, maybe viewing the feed. And these interfaces very often ship with default usernames and passwords.
Like admin and password?
Or admin and admin, or admin and blank, or some model-specific default that's easily found online. Manufacturers publish them in manuals, on support forums. Attackers know where to look.
So step one for an attacker might just be finding the camera's IP address online, using a tool like Shodan maybe, and then just trying the known default credentials for that model.
That's a very common first step. Scan the internet for open camera ports, identify the model if possible, try the default login. It's often automated. And the situation gets worse because sometimes installers, maybe rushing a job, don't change the password at all. Or even worse, they use the same simple password, maybe the default, for every single camera in a large installation.
Oh, wow. So one weak password compromises the entire system.
Instantly. Attackers can use automated tools, scripts, to just hammer away at the web interface or login port, trying lists of common passwords, brute forcing it. Especially if the cameras are accessible from the network they're on. Research shows tools can quickly find common default usernames like admin. It's used across tons of brands. And those password lists, like the ones used by the Mirai botnet, they're readily available online.
And you mentioned earlier that even some legitimate software can sort of accidentally help the attackers here.
Yeah, this is a really interesting, kind of ironic twist. Some software designed to comply with the own MVIF standard.
On VIF, that's the standard, so cameras from different companies can talk to each other.
Exactly. It promotes interoperability. But some ONVIF compliant management software, in an effort to be user-friendly and easily discover cameras on the network, might automatically try to log in using a list of common or default credentials.
To save the user typing them in.
Right. But if the user hasn't changed the defaults, the software effectively acts like an automated brute force tool. It finds the camera and tries the defaults. In testing on one particular camera brand, it was found the default password was actually blank, nothing at all. And the ONVIF software successfully logged in automatically, no password needed, effectively finding and exploiting that vulnerability without the user even realizing it.
Wow. So the tool meant to help you manage your system could inadvertently expose a massive security hole if you didn't do that first basic step.
It just hammers home how absolutely critical changing those defaults is immediately upon installation. It's security 101, but it's still the entry point for so many attacks.
Okay, so passwords are huge. What else? You mentioned network level stuff.
Right. Moving beyond the device itself, attackers can exploit vulnerabilities in how networks operate. One classic example is ARP poisoning.
ARP poisoning. Sounds nasty. What is it?
ARP stands for Address Resolution Protocol. On a local network, devices use ARP to figure out the physical hardware address, the MP address that corresponds to a specific IP address. 192.168.1.1net needs to send data to 192.1.1.1.1, the router. It sends an ARP request asking who has 192.168.1.1, and the router replies with its ME address.
Okay, standard network chatter.
Exactly. Devices keep a cache, a temporary table, of these IP to MAC mappings. ARP poisoning, or ARP spoofing, is where an attacker on the same local network sends out fake ARP messages. They essentially lie to other devices. They might tell the camera, hey, the router's IP address, that's actually my MT address. And they tell the router, hey, the camera's IP address, that's my MP address too.
So they trick both ends into sending traffic to the attacker instead of each other.
Precisely. They insert themselves into the communication path. It's a man-in-the-middle attack. And the material we looked at describes this as relatively easy to pull off and highly effective.
Why is it so effective? Don't devices check?
That's the key problem. Many devices historically just don't rigorously validate incoming ARP replies. They tend to trust them. And crucially, they often don't check if an existing entry in their ARP cache is still valid before accepting a new, potentially poisoned update. They just overwrite the old mapping with the attacker's fake one.
So it's hard for the victim devices to even know they're being spoofed.
Very difficult at the device level itself. Once the attacker's in the middle, they can intercept everything flowing between the camera and the recorder, or the camera and the person viewing it. They can read the data, potentially modify it, or just block it altogether.
That gives them immense control over the video feed and any control signals.
It absolutely does. Then there's another major vulnerability, often driven by user convenience: exposing systems directly to the internet.
Wanting to see your cameras when you're away from home.
Exactly. People understandably want remote access via their phone or laptop, but the common way this is achieved, especially with older or simpler systems, is through port forwarding on their router.
Explain port forwarding quickly.
Sure. Your router acts as a gateway between your local network and the internet. Port forwarding tells the router, if traffic comes in from the internet aimed at a specific port number, say port 80 for web traffic or maybe port 554 for video streaming, send that traffic directly to this specific device inside my network, like your DVR or NVR.
So it punches a hole through the firewall, essentially.
Effectively, yes. It makes that internal device directly reachable from the entire internet on that specific port. And exposing any server, especially something like an HTTP web server, which many camera systems use for configuration, directly to the internet is inherently risky. These exposed devices get scanned constantly, thousands of times a day, by automated bots looking for open ports and known vulnerabilities.
Like the Heartbleed bug you mentioned. That hit exposed systems hard.
Exactly. Heartbleed was a major vulnerability in OpenSSL, a common encryption library. Systems exposed via port forwarding were prime targets, and it forced a huge scramble to patch and reset credentials because attackers could potentially steal sensitive information directly from the exposed device's memory. Just having that direct exposure multiplies the risk enormously.
So convenience creates a constant attack vector.
It can, if not done carefully.
Yeah.
Modern cloud-based solutions from reputable vendors can offer more secure remote access, often using intermediary servers so your device isn't directly exposed. But simple port forwarding of local recorders is still common and remains a significant risk.
And sticking with networks, you also mentioned poor network design or topology.
Right. This is about how you connect the camera system into your overall network. A huge mistake is connecting the security cameras, the DVR, the NVR, whatever it is, directly onto the same network segment as your main business computers, your servers with sensitive data, or even just your personal home computers.
Putting everything in the same basket.
Pretty much. Without any segmentation, if an attacker manages to compromise the camera system, maybe through a weak password, maybe an unpatched firmware vulnerability, they now have a foothold inside your main trusted network. From there, they can potentially pivot and try to access everything else, your financial records, customer data, personal files.
It's like letting the fox guard the henhouse,
Mhm.
but the fox has a known vulnerability.
That's a good way to put it. The camera system becomes the weak link that compromises the whole network. And it's not just about exploiting vulnerabilities in the camera software. We've seen reports suggesting some DVRs, particularly cheaper or less reputable ones, can even ship with viruses or malware pre-installed. Seriously, from the factory.
It sounds incredible, but it's been reported. If you unknowingly connect such a compromised device directly to your main network, you're basically injecting malware straight into your environment.
That's terrifying. So network separation is crucial.
Absolutely. The ideal scenario, especially for businesses or sensitive environments, is a completely physically separate network for the security cameras. Different switches, maybe even a different internet connection.
But that might be overkill for home users.
It can be complex or costly, yes. So the next best thing, and highly recommended, is using virtual local area networks, or VLANs. Most modern managed switches support VLANs. They let you logically divide a single physical switch into multiple separate broadcast domains. You put all the cameras and the recorder in one VLAN and all your computers and other trusted devices in another VLAN. They can't talk directly to each other unless you explicitly configure rules in your firewall or router to allow specific traffic. It contains the risk.
Okay, that makes sense. Like creating internal walls within your network. Exactly. And finally, we have the vulnerabilities within the operating systems and software running on these devices.
Just like regular computers, they have bugs.
Of course. Cameras, DVRs, NVRs, VMS servers, they all run some kind of operating system. Often it's an embedded version of Linux on the cameras and recorders themselves. VMS servers might run on Windows Server. And on top of the OS, there's the manufacturer's specific firmware and application software. All of this software inevitably has bugs, and some of those bugs are security vulnerabilities.
And getting patches can be hit or miss.
That's a major challenge. While IT departments usually handle patching for standard operating systems like Windows, getting timely and consistent security updates or patches for the firmware on the cameras or the proprietary software on the DVR and VR can be unreliable. Some manufacturers are good about it, others are slow, and some might just abandon older models, leaving known vulnerabilities unpatched indefinitely.
So you could be stuck with a vulnerable device.
Potentially, yes. This creates an ongoing risk if these systems aren't actively managed, monitored for known vulnerabilities, and updated when patches are available. But even applying updates isn't risk-free.
Right, you mentioned updates can sometimes cause problems.
They can. Users have reported firmware updates breaking existing features. Maybe the fancy auto-tracking on a PTZ camera stops working. Or features get removed entirely. APIs might change, breaking integrations with other systems. Sometimes updates cause devices to start phoning home excessively, using up bandwidth or sending data you didn't expect. And in the worst case, an update can brick the device, just rendering it completely useless.
Bricking it, like turning it into a paperweight.
Essentially, yes. And this is a particular risk if you're not careful about firmware compatibility. Sometimes units manufactured for one region, say China, are hacked or flashed with different firmware to be sold in another region, like the US, often to get an English interface. Applying an official firmware update from the manufacturer to one of these modified units can sometimes revert it back to its original language, or worse, detect the modification and brick it.
Oh, yeah.
Also, Manufacturers sometimes release different hardware versions or chipset versions under the same model number. Applying firmware meant for one chipset version to a camera with a different chipset can also lead to bricking due to incompatibility.
So updating requires real care. You need the right firmware for your specific device.
Absolutely. Always try to get firmware directly from the vendor you bought the device from, or the official manufacturer's site for your specific model and region. Be very wary of firmware found on random websites or forums, and check compatibility carefully.
Okay, that covers a lot of ground on how these systems can be compromised. Weak passwords, ARP spoofing, direct internet exposure, poor network design, software flaws, risky updates. Now let's shift to the impacts. Once an attacker gets in, what can they actually do with that access?
Well, one of the first and most common uses is reconnaissance, intelligence gathering.
Using the camera to spy, basically.
Exactly, but it can be quite sophisticated. Using the camera's video feed or even audio if it has a microphone, attackers could potentially capture sensitive information. Think about passwords being typed on a keyboard visible to the camera, credentials displayed on a monitor, maybe sensitive documents left on a desk, or even conversations happening nearby.
Wow. Visual and audio bugging.
Potentially, yes. They can also use access to the camera or its system to identify vendor and device details of other equipment on the network. They can get a really good understanding of a facility's physical layout, where doors are, where equipment is, patterns of movement, which is invaluable for planning a physical break-in, or they can map the network layout if the camera's interface or configuration files provide clues about subnets, IP addresses, or connected systems.
They're essentially building an operational blueprint of the target.
Yes, and gathering other sensitive operational data too, maybe understanding system conditions like when a plant is scheduled for maintenance, when staffing levels are typically low, or gleaning information about emergency procedures or contingency plans. We also talked about ARP poisoning enabling packet sniffing.
Right, intercepting the network traffic.
That can reveal usernames being transmitted. Even if passwords use slightly better protection, like digest authentication, analysis of some systems, like Xioma VMS, showed that the software might still end up revealing passwords in plain text within the intercepted data stream under certain conditions.
So even encrypted-ish passwords might not be safe.
Not always, depending on the whole system implementation. And of course, if they can get direct access to the camera feeds, especially if, like in that one brand tested, no authentication was required at all, they can just sit back and watch. Spy on activity, check building layouts, look for security patrols, see if lights are on or off, figure out if people are present. All valuable intelligence before making a move.
So the camera feed itself is a rich intelligence source.
Absolutely. Beyond just watching, a major impact is disruption.
Stopping the camera from doing its job.
Exactly. If an attacker is planning a physical intrusion, one of their first goals is often to disable or disrupt the cameras covering their entry point or the area they'll be operating in. They want to avoid being recorded, avoid identification, and delay any security alerts.
How would they disrupt it?
Well, as demonstrated with that man-in-the-middle ARP poisoning attack, an attacker positioned on the network can instantly interrupt or completely block the connection to the camera feeds. They can just drop the packets.
So for the security guard watching the monitor,
It might just look like the camera feed froze or went black or displayed a connection lost error, especially if they're using a basic video player like VLC, which often doesn't give very specific error messages for dropped streams. It creates ambiguity. Is it a network glitch? Is the camera broken? Or is something malicious happening? That delay in realizing it's an attack buys the intruder crucial time.
making a deliberate attack look like a technical fault.
Exactly. And disruption isn't just about the video feed. Remember the botnets. Compromised cameras can be used to launch those goals. Distributed denial of service attacks against other targets, disrupting websites or online services. Within critical infrastructure, disruption could also mean manipulating the information sent from monitoring systems back to the operators, feeding them false data about temperatures, pressures, or statuses, potentially leading them to take wrong actions, ignore dangerous conditions, or shut down processes unnecessarily.
Okay, that leads into the really scary stuff. Control and manipulation, especially with the cameras tied into OT or safety systems.
This is where the potential consequences become most severe. If an attacker compromises a camera that's sitting on the IT network, the office network, they could potentially use that compromised camera as a pivot point, a beachhead, to try and move laterally across network segments into the more sensitive OT environment.
Jumping from the IT world to the industrial control world.
That's the goal. Once in the OT network, they could try to exfiltrate sensitive process data, proprietary information about how the plant runs, its chemical formulas, its vulnerabilities. Or they could attempt to directly disrupt the OT processes themselves, maybe by sending malicious commands to controllers, potentially causing service outages, equipment damage, or major economic losses.
And if they manage to compromise a camera that's already on the OT network segment?
Then they're already inside the critical zone. That gives them much more direct access. From a compromised camera on the OT network, they could potentially pivot directly to the industrial control systems, ICS devices, the PLCs, the DCS controllers that are actually managing the physical machinery.
And the impact there.
It could range dramatically, from minor operational glitches, maybe tripping a circuit breaker, to truly catastrophic events. Think about manipulating controls to cause physical destruction of expensive turbines or reactors, triggering uncontrolled chemical reactions, causing widespread power outages, environmental spills, even potentially causing injury or death. A simple security camera, if compromised, could become the initial access vector for an attack with devastating physical consequences.
That's the chilling link. A digital vulnerability enabling real-world physical harm.
It is, and cameras tied into safety systems are another critical vector. Attackers could try to use access to these systems to suppress legitimate alarms, maybe hiding their own malicious activity or preventing operators from responding to a genuinely dangerous condition like a fire or a gas leak.
Or the opposite, triggering fake alarms.
Exactly. Trigger false alarms constantly to create chaos, confusion, maybe desensitize operators so they ignore real alarms later, the cry wolf effect. Or, in perhaps the most dangerous scenario, they could try to disable automated fail-safe mechanisms, systems designed to automatically shut down a process in an emergency. If those are disabled via a compromised safety system interface accessed through a camera, you could have an uncontrolled, potentially catastrophic failure.
So the very system designed for ultimate safety becomes a tool for ultimate danger.
That's the potential risk if security isn't paramount. And these digital intrusions, as we've hinted, can have very direct physical world impacts beyond these large-scale industrial scenarios, too.
You mentioned theft.
Yeah. Think about physical security. An attacker might first digitally compromise the camera system to figure out the layout, maybe see where the DVR or NVR that stores the recordings is located. Then they conduct a physical break-in, steal valuables, and specifically target the recording device itself, the smash and dash. They steal the evidence along with the loot.
Taking the recordings with them. Clever, in a criminal way.
And in more sophisticated state-sponsored contexts, there's the potential use of geolocation data. If an attacker can get precise location information from a compromised camera or its associated system, that data could potentially be used to inform, support, or refine targeting for actual physical or kinetic military strikes.
Wow. Using a camera hack to help aim missiles or drones.
It's a potential intelligence application highlighted in the materials we reviewed. And even in less dramatic scenarios, attackers might try manipulating the video feed itself, an integrity violation, maybe injecting a pre-recorded loop of an empty corridor to make operators think an area is clear when, in fact, intruders are moving through it.
The fake video loop trick, like in the movies.
It's harder to pull off seamlessly than movies suggest, but it's a known deception tactic. It provides a window for physical intrusion by misleading the human monitors.
Okay, it's abundantly clear the potential impacts are incredibly broad and can be extremely severe. From basic spying and disruption right up to enabling major physical or industrial incidents. It paints a pretty worrying picture. But as you said at the start, the good news is there are concrete steps people can take. Let's shift gears fully now. How do we secure these things? What are the mitigations and best practices?
Absolutely. And the place to start, the absolute bedrock foundation, is strong password hygiene. I know we keep saying it, but it's critical because that's where so many compromises begin.
Change those defaults immediately.
Non-negotiable. First thing you do, change all default usernames and passwords. On the camera itself, on the DVR, the NVR, the VMS software, any mobile apps associated with it, everything needs a unique, strong password.
What makes a password strong?
Long, complex, and not easily guessable. Avoid dictionary words, names, birthdays, keyboard patterns like QWERTY. A really good technique that's easier to remember is using, say, 3 random words. Just pick 3 unrelated words from a dictionary, string them together, maybe add a number or a symbol in there. Correct horse battery staple is the famous example. It creates something long and very hard for automated tools to guess, but potentially memorable for you.
And for businesses, it needs to be policy.
Definitely. Organizations need to implement and rigorously enforce strong password policies, no sharing passwords, use password managers, and have clear procedures for changing passwords regularly and especially critically, immediately revoke access or change passwords when an employee who had system access leaves the company or even just changes roles internally. Close those potential insider or ex-employee threats.
Okay, passwords first, then network segmentation. You really hammered on the danger of flat networks.
It's probably the single most effective architectural defense. Network segmentation is key to containing the damage if one device does get compromised. Ideally, as we said, put the entire security camera system on a physically separate network, its own switches, its own wiring, maybe even its own internet connection if feasible, completely air-gapped from your main business or home network.
A dedicated camera network.
That's the gold standard. Now, if physical separation isn't practical or is too expensive, the next best thing is using those virtual local area networks, VLANs. Use your managed switch capabilities to create a separate logical network just for the cameras and recorder.
Right, the internal walls.
Exactly. Isolate the camera traffic. Prevent a compromised camera from having direct access to your sensitive servers or personal computers on other VLANs. You need a firewall or router configured correctly to control any necessary traffic between the VLANs.
Which brings us to firewalls and maybe intrusion detection.
Essential layers, absolutely. Don't rely on basic router firewalls that just block ports. Use modern stateful firewalls, sometimes called next-generation firewalls, NGFWs, that can perform deeper inspection. They understand protocols. They can analyze the content of the traffic, not just the port number, to spot malicious activity or communications that don't conform to standards.
More intelligent filtering.
Much more intelligent. And ideally, especially in business environments, deploy an intrusion detection system, IDS, or an intrusion prevention system, IPS. Tools like Snort, Suricata, Zeek, there are good open source and commercial options. These systems actively monitor network traffic, looking for known attack signatures or anomalous behavior. Snort, for example, has rules specifically designed to detect ARP poisoning attempts by watching for those suspicious ARP replies.
So it can actively alert you if someone's trying that man-in-the-middle attack.
Correct. But these tools need to be implemented correctly. Configure them professionally, document the rules you set up, keep their signatures updated, and most importantly, monitor the alerts they generate. An unmonitored IDSEPs is just noise.
Right. Need someone watching the watcher. What about encryption? That was a big vulnerability mentioned earlier.
Yes, embrace encryption everywhere possible. Protect data both when it's moving across the network data in transit and when it's stored on a disk data at rest. For data in transit, always use encrypted connections like HTTPS, which uses SSL/TLS, for accessing web interfaces or viewing feeds through browsers or mobile apps. Avoid protocols that send video or, critically, login credentials unencrypted over the network, like standard RTP or basic HTTP authentication. Look for support for protocols like Secure RTP, SRTP, which encrypts the actual video payload, and secure authentication methods.
And for the recordings themselves, on the DVR or NVR.
Encrypt the video data when it's stored on disk. Many modern NVRs and VMS platforms offer options for disk level or volume level encryption. This prevents someone from simply stealing the hard drive and reading the video off it directly. And ideally, look for systems that offer true end-to-end encryption, E2EE.
E2EE, meaning encrypted from the camera all the way to the viewer.
Exactly. The video is encrypted right on the camera before it even hits the network cable. It travels fully encrypted across all networks, local and internet, and it's only decrypted by the authorized viewing application on your specific device, phone, computer. Some cloud systems might claim encryption, but they decrypt the video on their servers, perhaps for analysis or transcoding, before re-encrypting it to send to you. That decryption point on their server is a potential vulnerability that true E2EE avoids.
Got it. True end-to-end is the goal. Now, updates. We talked about the risks, but they're necessary for security. How do you manage that balancing act?
Cautiously but strategically. You absolutely must keep software and firmware updated because those updates contain vital patches for security vulnerabilities that attackers will exploit if you don't patch. So turn on automatic updates if your system offers it and you trust the vendor's process. Ensure automatic updates are enabled for any mobile apps or desktop VMS clients you use. Keep the operating system of any VMS server patched diligently.
But apply them carefully. Check first.
Yes. Before manually applying a firmware update to a camera or recorder, always check the vendor's release notes. Understand what the update does. Is it fixing critical security flaws, or is it just adding minor features you don't need? Prioritize the security patches. Maybe hold off on a purely feature-based update if your system is stable and there are reports of that update causing issues. And as we discussed, double-check and triple-check that the firmware file is the exact correct version for your specific hardware model, region, and potentially even chipset version to avoid that dreaded bring scenario.
Get it from the official source.
Always. The vendor you bought it from, or the manufacturer's official support site for your specific product, be extremely wary of firmware found elsewhere online. And if you're running a complex VMS on a Windows or Linux server, remember that the underlying OS and any database software it uses also need regular patching and management by your IT department or a qualified professional. For cloud-managed systems, part of their value proposition is that the vendor should handle all the back-end security patching automatically, taking that burden off you, but verify that's actually part of their service commitment.
So updates are essential but require diligence. Got it. What about physical security?
Often overlooked, but critical. Don't just focus on network security and forget about the physical hardware. Secure physical access to the equipment itself.
The cameras, the cables, the box that records it all.
All of it. Protect outdoor cameras from easy tampering or theft if possible. Secure any exposed network cables running to the cameras. And most importantly, keep the room or cabinet housing, the DVR, NVR, VMS server, network switches, and storage servers physically secure. Use strong locks, maybe access control systems in a business setting. Limit who can get into that room.
And maybe put a camera watching the camera equipment.
It sounds a bit meta, but yes, it's actually a good practice. Have video surveillance of the security equipment room itself. This helps prevent unauthorized access, tampering, and those smash and dash scenarios where the thief steals the recorder to destroy the evidence. Physical security complements cybersecurity.
Makes sense. Choosing the right vendor from the start seems important too.
Hugely important. Avoid the temptation to buy the absolute cheapest no-name camera models, especially from dubious online marketplaces, or buying used cameras where you have no idea about their history or firmware status. Critically, avoid brands that are explicitly named on government-restricted lists, like the U.S. government's Entity List or FCC Covered List, due to documented security concerns or links to potentially adversarial nation-states.
Do your homework on the brand.
Yes. Look for established companies with a good reputation for data security. Do you have a history of being transparent about vulnerabilities and breaches? Do they have a clear, proactive process for issuing security patches? Read reviews, check their security policies. Their overall commitment to security is a key factor in choosing wisely.
And that extra login step we use everywhere now, MFA or 2FA.
Two-factor authentication. Absolutely enable it if your camera system, the management portal, the mobile app, or the VMS offers it. 2FA adds a crucial second layer of security beyond just your password. Typically, it requires you to enter a code sent to your phone via SMS or generated by an authenticator app, like Google Authenticator or Authy, after you enter your password.
So even if someone steals your password?
They still can't log in without also having access to your phone authenticator app for that second factor. It dramatically reduces the risk of account compromise due to stolen or weak passwords. Enable it wherever it's offered.
Okay. And lastly, can you actively look for signs of trouble?
Detect. Yes. That's the final piece, implementing some detection capabilities. Explore using network monitoring tools like the IDS CPS systems we mentioned, Snort, etc. Configure them to specifically watch the camera network segment for suspicious activities. Look for signs of ARP poisoning, unusual outbound traffic from cameras. Are they phoning home unexpectedly? Port scanning originating from a camera, or multiple failed login attempts. There's also ongoing research into more advanced defenses, like that antidote scheme concept, where devices might intelligently check their own ARP cache validity. But for now, vigilant network monitoring is the most practical approach to detection.
That's a really solid set of actions. Passwords, segmentation firewalls, encryption, careful updates, physical security vendor choice, 2FA detection. It covers a lot. So let's tie this all back. Why does this deep dive, understanding all these risks, really matter directly to you, the listener?
It matters profoundly because the risks we've talked about aren't just abstract technical possibilities. Their potential impact ripples outwards.
You mean like the critical infrastructure examples? That affects everyone.
Exactly. When vital systems, energy grids, water supplies, chemical plants, transportation networks are potentially vulnerable through something as common as a connected camera, that vulnerability becomes a societal risk. A successful attack leveraging these devices could lead to widespread service disruptions, economic chaos, environmental damage, even risk to public safety. Understanding that these seemingly small devices can be gateways to such major risk is, frankly, part of being an informed citizen in our hyper-connected age.
And even just thinking about your own home or your small business, these vulnerabilities hit close to home, right? Affecting privacy and basic security.
Absolutely. Think about it personally. Could a burglar casing your neighborhood use simple default password guessing to access your home camera feed and see when you're away? Could they potentially disable your cameras remotely right before breaking in, ensuring there's no recording? Could your camera, without your knowledge, be part of a botnet used to attack websites, maybe even drawing unwanted scrutiny from law enforcement or ISPs to your network? Could recorded video stored on a compromised DVR, maybe footage from inside your home, be stolen and shared online? These are very real, very personal risks that directly apply if security measures aren't taken.
It really drives home that even consumer-grade tech has significant security implications that we need to take seriously.
They absolutely do. And look, we know the world is full of complex technical threats. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by security warnings. The whole point of this deep dive was to try and cut through some of that noise, to focus on the most impactful, documented vulnerabilities specifically related to connected cameras based on the material we've reviewed, and crucially, to present practical, achievable steps you can take. It's about equipping you with essential knowledge quickly and thoroughly so you can actually do something to protect yourself.
Okay, so let's quickly recap the key points from this deep dive.
We've seen that these ubiquitous internet-connected cameras, while designed for security, can paradoxically introduce serious vulnerabilities. We talked about the basics: weak default passwords, lack of encryption for video streams or credentials. We covered network issues, the dangers of direct internet exposure via port forwarding, the critical need for network segmentation, and attacks like ARP poisoning that exploit network protocols. And we touched on the risks within the devices themselves, unpatched operating systems and firmware, and the potential pitfalls of applying updates improperly.
And the potential impacts are really broad, starting with reconnaissance and spying, moving to disruption like disabling feeds or launching DOS attacks, then escalating to enabling theft by targeting recording devices, and in the most critical scenarios, acting as entry points for sophisticated actors potentially targeting critical infrastructure, maybe pre-positioning for future attacks, or even facilitating physical targeting or manipulating safety systems.
It's a complex threat landscape, all stemming from these devices we often just stick on a wall and assume are making us safer.
But, and this is the crucial warning, being aware of these risks is genuinely the first and most powerful step. That knowledge empowers you to act. Simple things? Well, seemingly simple. Implementing strong, unique passwords everywhere. Segmenting your camera network using VLANs or a separate physical network. Using robust firewalls and maybe even intrusion detection. Making sure data is encrypted, both moving and stored. Managing those updates carefully but diligently. Securing the physical boxes and cables, choosing reputable vendors who prioritize security, and enabling two-factor authentication wherever possible. These are all vital, concrete steps.
Vigilance really is key. It's not a set-it-and-forget-it situation. Attackers adapt, new vulnerabilities are found. Security for connected devices has to be an ongoing process of awareness, assessment, and action.
And as we think about securing these systems and the often sensitive video data they generate or the critical systems they might connect to, it really highlights the importance of securing the data storage itself, which brings us back one last time to our sponsor. Because security needs multiple layers, right? And protecting the data is fundamental.
Absolutely. Stonefly provides enterprise-grade storage solutions that are specifically designed with security at their core. They offer those crucial ransomware-proof features like air-gapped backups, physically disconnected, and immutable storage, where data, once written, cannot be changed or deleted for a set period. That provides a powerful defense layer for your valuable video archives or any other critical information these systems might handle.
So for that really robust, secure storage foundation, especially vital when dealing with potentially targeted video feeds or operational data from critical systems, contacting Stonefly at sales@stonefly.com for a demo is definitely something to consider. Their solutions add that resilience against many of the attack outcomes we've discussed, ensuring your data has a fighting chance, even if other defenses fail.
They build that data survivability right into the storage layer. It's crucial.
As our world just gets more and more connected, billions of devices constantly talking, sharing data. Maybe the most important layer of security isn't just the fancy tech itself, the firewalls or the complex encryption, Maybe it's actually our collective understanding how this stuff works, where the weak points tend to lie, and importantly, our willingness, individually and collectively, to take those proactive, consistent steps to protect ourselves and especially our shared critical infrastructure.
Yeah, it shifts security from just being a product you buy to being a practice you maintain, an ongoing state of, like you said, informed readiness.
Absolutely. So here's a final thought to leave you with, reflecting on everything we've unpacked today. What's the one thing that stands out most to you about how you'll approach your own connected devices, particularly any security cameras, in your life moving forward? Maybe just one change you'll make or one thing you'll check. It's definitely a thought worth sitting with.